Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm your host, Rob Kent, and as you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, which is available as an audiobook, as a paperback, but the ebook, oh, esteemed audience, the ebook is free. Yes, free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this. But seeing as how this is the Halloween episode of Middle Grade Ninja, although I would argue the last few episodes have been Halloween episodes, but this is a Halloween episode. If you're listening to it not on Halloween, whatever. Remember, I've got some scary books available for you as well under the super secret pen name Robert Kent. Add two letters, Robert. You could check out my horror story all together now, a zombie story. You can check out my epic serial horror novel in the vein of Stephen King. That's the Book of David. You've got a haunted house. You've got flying saucers, lots of profanity, everything you could possibly want in a good, scary Halloween story. And good news, that Book of David, it's available as a 5-volume serial installment horror novel, but you can get the first part of that, the Book of David, Chapter 1 by Robert Kent, for free whenever you're watching or listening to this. So by God, we're only a couple of minutes in and I've already given you 2 free books. What more could you want? What a fantastic show this is. As always, for interviews with all the world's best people, book people, I'm talking authors, I'm talking literary agents, editors, all of those interviews plus guest posts and all sorts of insightful information is available at middlegradeninja.com, including a 7-question interview with today's guest, Mr. Dan Poblocki. Dan, welcome to the program. I'm thrilled that you're here.
Thanks for having me. I'm so pleased to be here.
So esteemed audience knows that I never torture my guests by making them sit through me summarizing their background or their book. How painful that would be for you when you're right here and could do a better job. So the best place for us to get started is if you would give esteemed audience an overview of your background.
Sure. Well, I'm Dan Poblocki. I'm the author of at least 20 books over the past 15 years, most of them under my own name. A lot of them sort of scary, spooky mysteries, ghostly stuff. The newest one is called Tales to Keep You Up at Night. It came out in August. And it's my first kind of collection of short stories, but these stories are interlinked and there's a framing narrative that connects them even further, so it sort of reads like a novel. Yeah, I've been doing this for like 15, 16 years and never thought that I was going to be a writer, and started writing one day and realized that I really loved it. And thankfully and luckily, I'm still able to do this. So that's basically my background.
So what a perfect guest that we're fortunate enough to have here for the Halloween episode, because I've seen your name around with the scary book displays for years now. I, of course, became aware of you back when the Nightmarys came out. That was my first introduction. And then you've been steadily moving right along with a few other stories, but mostly the scary. But I know that you started with a degree in theater, right, from Syracuse University.
I did.
We're touring the United States playing Ichabod Crane, which that's very appropriate to this Halloween episode.
Yeah.
So how do you get how does that prepare you for life as an author traveling with a theater company, and then 2, how do you get from there to author?
I mean, I think traveling with a theater company can just like prepare you for lots of things. Like doesn't necessarily need to lead to author. Like it's a very humbling experience, especially when you're doing theater for children and you're literally building the set and breaking it down every day in a new place, oftentimes school auditoriums or gyms. And I guess in a way, if I were to try and think of how it prepared me for this life that I'm living now. I mean, it was a very early sort of exposure to the educational system in this country. I was working with performing for educators and their students, and afterwards the kids would come up and ask questions, and I realized I mean, I've always sort of had a rapport with kids, and like that youthful mind. Like I feel like that's sort of where I sort of sort of live in my 12-year-old memory. I think that's why I still write about that age. But the touring, the acting, I think ultimately comes down to having that in common, having something in common with writing, and that's just a love of storytelling from another angle. And storytelling is something that I've loved since I was a little kid. Getting together with friends and trying to come up with the scariest scenario, freak each other out. I loved recounting the plots of the latest horror movie that I would see to my little cousins and get in trouble for doing that. It was always about wanting to sort of impart and share something that I thought was really exciting and cool to whoever wanted to listen. So I think that's ultimately where the acting bug came in. And really after those tours and living in New York City for a little while, that fell away. I realized I did not like auditioning. I did not like spending 8 hours at an open call and then having 30 seconds in front of casting directors and having them dead-eyed look at you and be like, thank you, and realize that you just wasted another day. So when I moved to when I was in New York City and auditioning and doing that in the late 90s, I just realized, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. What else do I have? What else can I do? What makes me happy? And it came back to the love of storytelling. And I was like, maybe I can try writing. And I mean, I took a playwriting class in college and I loved that. So I sort of started with that, and through, meeting some people in New York City and realizing like there was this whole children's literature world. And, I started trying my own hand at it, and got really, really lucky. So that's, I guess that's where the connection is. That's not really long, roundabout answer.
No, I love long answers. That gets free information that I would never have been smart enough to ask. that makes my job easy. But 8 hours for 30 seconds, then you walk in and they're thinking, I don't know, we wanted somebody with bright red hair, which you don't have, or whatever it is that they had in their mind that they probably could have ruled out with a headshot before you ever walked in or wasted the day. Assuming because you majored in theater, because you were sort of, I'm not talking to you, and like that's when I stopped being an accountant and decided to go be a children's book author. You always wanted to chase some sort of artistic endeavor, some sort of dream.
Oh yeah.
That must have been a hard decision to say that there's a trade-off here, because I'm assuming at some point you loved acting. Decided, I'm gonna step away completely.
I was a theater nerd in high school, and love to all of the theater nerds. You make the world go round. But that was when it was fun for me, like middle school, high school, being with my friends and having extra time to do some just fun stuff. And then going to college for it, that changed things. There was this added pressure on top of it, and there was I feel like at that point, because you're being graded, which is, I have my own opinions about that in terms of art school. I think it's, I don't know. I don't think it's really fair. But there's this pressure, and there was this pressure about how you're supposed to look and how you're supposed to talk and how, like, some of the things that were said to me, I can't imagine flying in today's world. When I was in school, I had a great experience. I loved my teachers. I understand it was a different kind of world, but it was a world where people like me weren't necessarily, going to be heading out there and finding jobs about, like work, acting roles about people like me. Like it was, still the 90s, and Will and Grace was just starting, and like people were like, oh my gosh, queer people can exist on television and be popular. Like, how can we monetize this? We haven't quite gotten to, where we are now. But going back to, the idea of being a creative person, wanting to be an artist, like for me, even in high school, it's like it was between like drawing and painting, and had such a love for that. And then I loved my English classes, and so it was about like trying to consume as much literature as I could and think about those things. And then, the acting part, the storytelling and singing, and I was in the choir. It's like I did every single thing that I could try to do that made me feel like I was expressing myself in a truthful way. And when I was looking at colleges, that was something that we were expected to do. I was looking at theater schools, and I was looking at art schools, and I've always been obsessed with children's book illustration, and I thought that it would be a fun thing for me to do. I know, very, very difficult and hard to break into and sustain and all that stuff, but I was, naive. So even from a very early age, like I sort of had this love for children's literature. And in a roundabout way, came to where I am now. I don't think the weird thing is, I don't think I'd be where I am right now if I didn't go through all of those paths and roadways that I took, going to theater school and having that devastating realization that I didn't love it anymore. When I was in New York City after, several years, I was looking at people who were successful and realizing like they love this so much, they're so passionate about it that they're willing to stick with it, no matter how it makes them feel about themselves, about their bodies, about, what kind of feedback they're getting. They like, these people are unique, hardcore, passionate people. And I realized that I didn't have that inside myself regarding performance. And in fact, like after I graduated from college, I ended up getting severe stage fright, and I started hating it. So when I had made that decision to stop auditioning, I felt really lost for a long time. And in those days, I was temping to make my paycheck, pay my rent in New York City. And those were interesting times in offices, because like it paid really well to temp, and oftentimes they just wanted somebody to fill a seat, and if the phone rang, you answered the phone and maybe took a message. A lot of those jobs at that time were just sitting and sitting and sitting. And so I was like, what am I going to do with myself here? And I started writing. So that's where it started for me, temping in New York City and being bored. Yeah, and then I took a class at School of Visual Arts. Brian Floco was my teacher, Caldecott winning children's book artist. This was way before that happened, and the class was called Children's Books from the Edge, and I still remember wanting to sign up for this class, and it was a lot of fun. It was like oh, like bridging my old love for like children's literature and children's illustration to something new and tangible for me. And I was like, I bought all these art supplies and I was really doing it. And like I'd come up with a manuscript and a dummy, book dummy, and what ended up happening was Brian had an editor friend near the end of the class come in to talk to us about how publishing worked. And the editor friend was named David Levithan. And he is, at the time, he had just started an imprint at Scholastic called Push. He was kind and generous enough to talk to us about picture books, even though that wasn't really his interest. One class, I was heading home. I was living in Williamsburg, and walking home, I ran into Brian Floca and David Levithan, and they had, like, this was just after class, and they were heading to some bluegrass concert at a local bar, and they were like, "Come and join us." And through that, I sparked friendships with both of them, and that was what changed my life. I mean, I learned that, not only was picture book illustration something that existed, but it was like this very early burgeoning of the YA resurgence, and I sort of paid very close attention to what I learned when I was around these people, and temping in the offices that I was working at. I realized I was like, well, maybe I could try some of this YA stuff. And that was really my first attempt at becoming, I wouldn't say serious. I just was just playing around and seeing what if I try and write a novel instead of these little short stories that I've been playing around with while sitting for 8 hours a day in a very quiet office and nobody looking at me. But that's kind of how everything sort of fell apart and then reassembled. I still look back at that one moment, making that choice to sign up for that continuing education class, and that changed my life. I mean, it's really weird to be able to look back at that one thing that if you hadn't done that, you wouldn't be sitting where you are right now. Do you have any moments like that? You ever have any moments like that?
I think everybody's got a few pivotal moments, and there's also a few moments where I recognize in retrospect, oh, I blew that. I could have done better at that moment. That probably would have been a crucial if I had been in my right mind, or not in my mind, if I had been prepared. Because sometimes those moments come along if you're not friendly, if you're not open to it, if you're not in a good place, you can blow right past it and miss it. And so I've got some where, oh my God, that worked out incredibly well. I would have never guessed. Thank God I was on it that day. And then some others you know what? I bet if I had been a little bit more on it that day, that seems like it was a good opportunity that I missed. Oh, well. I'd also love the idea that you're looking at the world of children's book illustrators and oh, you could get rejected. That's very uncertain. I better stick with acting. Better fall back on reliable theater to make my living.
The funny thing about that is that I knew that there was like anytime you're going to put yourself into an art or a creative field, there's going to be rejection, and there's going to be a lot of rejection. For me at that time, I mean, I had been getting lots of rejection as an actor, but what sort of was difficult and more painful about that was like what you said earlier, like you walk into a room and you don't look like how they anticipated, so they blow you off, and it starts to get into your head, like questioning, like, do I need to be skinnier? Do I need to have bigger muscles? Should I change my voice? Maybe my face isn't right. Like, like all of these questions sort of like dig deep inside of your psyche, and like are very, very harmful, at least for certain people. And I'm one of those people. Getting rejected where I'm not standing in the room with the person rejecting me, I feel is much easier. Like a rejection from an agent over email, or over mail back in the day when we were sending actual letters to people, sending hard copies of manuscripts to people, having come back and be like, no thanks, and either getting a reason why it was a no thanks or not. Like, great, I don't have to stand in the room with you while you say that to me, and then like slink down a hallway and take a subway home. Like, I'm just like, all right, I can turn on TV now or open a book and like move on. So I'm not saying that it's any easier necessarily to be rejected by by anybody who's gatekeeping or producing or directing or casting anything. Just for me personally, I think it was just like, I need to remove myself from a situation where all of this self-doubt is creating real problems. And thankfully, I'm not in that kind of space anymore. And I think it's hard. I think I really, like, that's why I say I have so much respect for the people who've stuck with it. And I have friends from college who have stuck with it. And maybe it took them 20 years. It's been more than 20 years. I guess about 20 years since I've left college. And they're just now like starting to find their groove in terms of like Hollywood or theater or something. Like I was like 20 years. I couldn't even imagine sticking through 20 years of auditioning and doing all the stuff that you have to do in order to have people remember your name and your face and be like, oh yeah, this person, they have a great reputation. Should we consider them for this job finally? Yeah, let's do it. I mean, I've friends, like I said, I have friends who are at that point now, and I'm so proud of them. I'm like, it's unbelievable. I'm not that kind of person.
I find it, I don't know if interesting is the right word, but it's amusing to me because I would think that being rejected as an actor would be easier. Oh, you were looking for a redhead, I'm not, then that's fine. I'm sorry you wasted my 8 hours, but that's okay. I brought a project or something. I made the most use of my time. Or if you say, I'm he's too handsome for the role, his muscles are too large.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Whereas if you're looking at my manuscript, I'm not there. You're not rejecting me. It's my art. Everything I had, I put into that, and it still wasn't good enough. Versus if I just walked into the room and you don't like my face, but you didn't even see my art.
Yeah.
That would have struck me as easier, but that sounds like that's not the case. It was so much easier just to have the cold rejection of the work.
I think it depends on the kind of person you are. Like, and at that time in my life, it was much harder to face people, to face people and see that kind of reaction, rather than like sending multiple letters to multiple people, manuscripts or whatever it was trying to do. And like all of that those decisions happening in some other room far away. Like it was like a very psychological sort of thing. But yeah, I can see
the
the case.
rejections that came were just such a nice relief and a break in the pace. Like, oh, that's fine. It's just a piece of paper. I don't have to look at you while you do it. Great, put it over there.
Yeah. And like I said, like I think there's a huge aspect of like not having to get on the train and like ride somewhere and like then be rejected. I was like, if you're gonna reject me, just like I want to stay home for it. So yeah.
That is a huge advantage of writing over anything that's collaborative like that, or like we were in music. You got to go to the band practice. You got to get everybody together. Whereas writing, it's just you. It's 2:00 in the morning. The whole world's asleep. I feel like this is Dan's time to shine. I'm doing this.
Yeah, and that's how it works sometimes. You know, it's like you pull all-nighters if you want. You can you're feeling that inspiration. There's a freedom to it if you're lucky enough to have that, you know, kind of freedom. Like I worked for 12 years for Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in sort of like an administration, different administration roles and research and analyst roles. And I did most of my early writing career while working there at the same time. And so oftentimes, yeah, I'd start writing at 11 p.m. after coming home from working all day, and then maybe going to the gym, making myself dinner, and be like, all right, well, let's crack open the computer, see how many words we can get down. And that was like that. I spent years doing that. Because I found a new passion instead of like the acting or you know the drawing and painting. I was like, I'm determined to get a draft of this manuscript done. And that was the difference between like why I felt I had to leave like the performance sort of arena, because I didn't have the passion for performing, for acting, for singing, and I didn't believe that I would actually ever be able to make it, or make a living, or you know have it be worth my while. Whereas I felt a passion to write, and like my first attempt at a book, it took me 4 years. It was 700 pages. It was a young adult novel, 700-page young adult novel that like was just contemporary kids in a high school. I mean, I feel like that was, if I were to, you know, to think about it in terms of like a master's or something, that was like my education by doing it myself, learning how to finish something, despite the fact that it went on and on and on and on, and is probably just, I hope all copies have been destroyed.
Except for the one they're going to put in the damn
Oh,
Memorial
I
Library.
know, like, you know, I heard a story a couple years ago. You know, I'm sure you know who John Bellairs is.
I'm not a podcast. Yes, I do.
For anybody who doesn't, and you should, because he does some good stuff. He is author of The House with the Clock in Its Walls, The Curse of the Blue Figurine, just so many other sort of gothic 1950s set Americana, like witches and wizards and spooky ghosts and curses and stuff like that. I loved him when I was a kid, like beyond. And I heard that before he passed away, you know, very young, in the early 90s, mid 90s, like he went through his office and like burned everything. He knew he was sick, And he was like, there was just stuff in there. He was like, I don't ever want this to be seen. And I understand that urge at this point. Sorry to be laughing while discussing one of my heroes, passings, but I do understand the urge to be like, well, when I'm gone, like, what kind of exploitation might be taking place, and I mean, the funny thing about that is that like his estate has gone on to work with an author named Brad Strickland and continue some of his unfinished manuscripts, and those sort of became a Brad Strickland, John Bellairs collaboration. And so, I mean, clearly there was stuff he didn't burn and that he was proud of and that he wanted to have live on after he was gone. But I just, yeah, I'm gonna have to look around here and see like what will be going into the bonfire if ever my time comes up and I'm aware.
Yeah, should you have the good fortune to know the day and be like, okay, well, I could be 100% prepared on that day. Whereas I have just, I understand that because there are things. I'm looking at a shelf right across from me that has some screenplays I wrote when I was in high school. That there are moments in there that I thought were very funny at age 18 that I do not find funny now.
Oh yeah, I bet.
I have just enough hubris that I think that if anybody were to go through it after I'm not around, one, I'm not here, so knock yourself out, whatever. There is an afterlife. I like to think that it's interesting enough. I'm not paying attention to what's still going on back here. Is my hope, or there is no me, in which case, whatever. But I have just enough hubris to think that, oh, well, if you read this, you'll know it's not good, but you'll see that there's just that spark of the excellence that was going to go on, light the bonfire of amazingness later.
Exactly. I mean, you have to wonder about the giants of these genres. It's like, did they ever just write something really, really bad that they never showed to anybody? And the answer must be yes. It has to be yes. Nobody's just pumping out something that is perfect in first go. Like, that's why we work with editors. That's why we work with agents, and these people like absolutely fundamentally help shape our work and try and get it to be the best version of what it is that we first imagined the work to be. I feel so lucky. I feel so lucky to be working with people that I work with and have worked with, because I don't think I could have managed to make the things that I've made on my own. You get your foot in the door with one person and you realize that they have some genius brilliance, and they're like, they suggest these little edits or things that happen, and like all of a sudden you think it's your idea. And you're like, gosh, of course I should have done that to this character. And no, this ending can't work. It's like that needs to be rewritten. But like these little author whisperers, these magical editor people, they're like, this needs to change, and I'm not gonna say anything negative about it, but it's your idea, like stuff like that. I think they're amazing.
It's this is I think episode 189.
Oh, wow.
And so now when I teach writing workshops, or I talk about writing, or even on the show, I just assume I'm regurgitating something somebody far more brilliant said on the show that I've heard and has gotten mixed up a little bit in the back of my mind, that, oh no, that's not an original thought. I assume it comes from a good place though. So
I'm sure I do the same thing, and I say, take it, embrace it. It's it's up for grabs, especially if you're teaching other people. Like, that kind of stuff it feels like it almost becomes universal, and you must share it.
And the people that said it to me learned it from someplace. I assume they're not born with the sacred knowledge that they've been getting for the first time.
Yes, the
So I
sacred,
was thinking
sacred
about that
knowledge of artists.
for that early work that I know I have, and I'm convinced Stephen King has it also. Obviously, a far more talented fellow than myself. But when he released Blaze for Richard Bachman, there's a
Oh
long
yeah.
forward on that says, "Hey, this was an early novel. Some may say this is just a Trump novel and shouldn't have been published." And like, well, I'm thinking you're saying that because I'm reading it in your forward, and then I read the book. But you know what? You were right. There's some here, but there's some also really embarrassing moments along in that story. Like that shouldn't have been published, but I understand why you published it, because there were some really good moments to outweigh there's a heart attack scene that's just absurdly ridiculous, that like if you turn it in a fiction workshop, they'd say, "Sir, no."
Sir, no,
He turns
please,
it into the editor.
please
They say,
leave.
"Oh, Stephen, you've done it again. We're all going to buy boats."
I mean, you get to a point like that, and like, yeah, people are gonna say, yes, yes, you're brilliant. And I feel like for him, I don't want to speak for Stephen King, but like, I feel like it's got to be harder at this point for him to be edited. And I know he's asked. When Lisi's story came out, I remember he had asked to work with somebody who wasn't his regular editor. I think, his regular editor was a man, and he was like, "This story is so female centered." He was like, "I would really love to be working with a woman editor on this." And he said the manuscript came back covered in red ink, which he was very grateful for. But I imagine that he would probably, I don't know, like at his level and his age, it's like he's going to do what he wants, like he's going to take the book, and how do you edit Stephen King at that point? Like, like it's interesting to me, how do you trust your genius brain, or are you going to listen to somebody else who's probably also genius if you're editing Stephen King? No, slight to the wonderful publishing professionals who work with him. I can just imagine it would just be very difficult for both of them.
I don't think they'd serve up an intern. Like, go talk to
No. Yeah.
It seems like a particularly sadistic act of cruelty. I would hope.
Can you imagine? Amazing. Like, yeah, I started at Scribner, and I was pouring coffees the other day, and somebody asked me to take a look at Stephen King's new manuscript, and I just wrote some thoughts down. Yeah, they'd be out the door.
As we record this, I'm a couple of hours into the Fable audiobook. We'll see how it ends. I've heard it unravels, but man, that man can nail a beginning. Just breathtaking. So I'm hoping that it will continue to be excellent.
I've heard good things. I'm right now. I'm in the middle of reading different seasons, the novellas, with The Body and Apt Pupil and Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption, Breathing Method. Reading it for the first time, ultimately because I'm trying to understand or see the voice, especially for the novella The Body, of this kind of like somebody looking back. When I think of the movie Stand By Me, it's from the perspective of a narrator who's looking back in his childhood, and that's, I feel like Stephen King does a really great job of capturing children on the page, child characters. It's like one of his biggest strengths. And as a middle grade author, like, I'm often writing from the perspective of of the kids themselves, in present time, whether I don't think I've ever written anything other than maybe one of the short stories in the new collection that's not third person. But I I've wanted to sort of see how this master is able to from an adult perspective, looking back sort of with nostalgia, through that lens, see how he is able to tell that story. Because I want to work on a project where an adult person is looking back on a child's experience rather than like what I usually do, which is the child's experience told as a child. So that's what I'm doing. But so I've heard, this fairy tale kind of captures some of that as well.
The new Stephen King.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that one too. But I do try to change it up and not only read Stephen King exclusively.
Oh yeah, no, that's a trap I fall into in the past, and then I start thinking, well, this is the way. This is the only way it can be. Read other writers. There's all sorts of brilliant folks out there, like Dan Poblocki. Let's dive in and talk a little bit about Tales to Keep You Up at Night. So true to my word, I won't make you sit through me summarizing your book to you. What does esteemed audience need to know about Tales to Keep You Up at Night?
Tales to Keep You Up at Night. It's right here. This is Amelia. The story is about Amelia. She finds a book in her grandmother's attic while she and her parents are helping clean out grandmother's house because her parents are getting ready to sell it. Grandmother's been missing, presumed dead for about a year. Amelia finds a book in the attic called Tales to Keep You Up at Night, and it appears to be from a library. And so she doesn't really want to be in the house. She's sort of mad at her mother's for cleaning out grandmother's things when Amelia herself believes grandmother might still be around. And she tries to bring the library book back to the library, and librarian says, this book never belonged here, but I remember this. I remember reading this book. It's really scary. And something tells Amelia to sit down at the library and start reading the book. And as she does, she realizes that these stories are connected to her own life in many, many ways. And as she's reading them, like pieces of the story start to appear in the library around her. So that by the end, she finds herself in a lot of trouble. That's basically what Tales to Keep You Up at Night is about. And it's like 13 stories, plus Amelia's story, tying them all together. And I just had a blast coming up with trying to come up with the scariest stuff that I could think of for kids without sort of going too far.
What does it mean to go too far? Do you have a hard and fast rule when you're writing horror for children?
It's funny because sometimes I'll get feedback from editors and they're like, we need you to do bad things to your characters. You haven't gone far enough. And I'm like, really? And Shadow House was one example of that. They were like, we need you to kill somebody. I was like, okay. And then there'll be other times where I'll just write. I'll write and see what I can get away with. I mean, there's not going to be any kind of adult material in there. I mean, I just feel like I sort of have a sense of where you draw the line. I've gotten some feedback to pull back on certain things that have to do with one of the things in Ghost I won't say the title of the book, but a character passes away in one of my books, a major character, and I wrote a grieving family scene after, this character passes. And out of all the scary things that happen in the book, like the editor was like, the grief is too much. Like, take out the grieving family and we'll just jump to like what happens after the family has this moment of grief. And I was like, that's really interesting. I was like, I never considered that. Like, that might be the traumatic aspect of what happens, or what a young reader might be able to sort of ingest. Like that might be what is too much. And then sometimes it's, a little bit of like blood, gore, guts. You just kind of have to reframe reframe the scene, reframe the details, leave out what can be imagined. And sometimes that's even worse, like describing, like vaguely describing a monster who might be holding something bloody or whatever. Like, let the audience fill in the gaps. I've found to be a pretty good rule for getting away with scary stuff for kids. And I like, trust me, I don't want to traumatize anybody. I don't want somebody coming away from my book feeling like they feel hurt or anything like that. My experiences reading scary stories when I was a kid, like, oftentimes were very comforting and cozy. John Beller's books were very cozy. They always ended with like the main character having a hot chocolate by a fire with a beloved elderly friend or family member. I don't necessarily go there, but I do try to leave the characters at least in the end of the novels, and Amelia too, in a place where there's even just a tiny little spark of hope for them. I don't know. That novel that killed that major character, I've gotten a lot of letters from kids and readers who were like, why did you do that? I had to sit there with my mom and come up with a new ending, like where the person survived. And it made me question, like, maybe I shouldn't have done it, but I did it for a reason. Like, in terms of like the long game that I'm playing, I was like, if everybody survives in every single one of my books, I was like, then, and you're a fan and you're reading them, like, and then you just expect everybody to always be okay in the end. And I was like, that lowers the stakes. Even if I was like, I have to do it at least once. I was like, I have to do this bad thing to a character at least once, so that if you are a fan and you're reading through the catalog and you encounter this book and you're like, oh no, nobody's safe, then you can continue reading my books as they come out, if I'm lucky enough to keep publishing them, and like always wonder, like, is the main character going to come out okay in the end? So
well, hopefully they read that book as number 2 or 3 and they're reading and not the last one. They're like, oh, they were safe. And then now I am shook, but I've read the last book, so that I have nothing to do with the shookness.
The shookness, yes.
But yeah, no, it makes sense. You have to demonstrate that you're willing to kill the hostage occasionally, or how are they going to take you serious? That makes sense.
Yeah, and it's weird because these are for kids, and I don't want to hurt any children, scar them psychologically or mentally. But the thing that I've learned about these kinds of books is that, either you're a kid who didn't know that you liked scary stories and you pick one up and you're like, oh, I like books. I didn't realize I liked books. Or you're a long-term fan of scary stories, and so they're used to it. Or like, they're just not for you. Like, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're feeling anxiety from like entertainment. And there's tons of people out there who I talk to are like, I just don't like them. I don't like scary stories. I will never read one of your books. I'm like, that's fine. You know yourself. So ultimately, like, if you're one of those kids who's like, this is too much for me, like, I've never met a child who's been like, this is too much for me, but I have to finish it. It's too much for me. I'm closing it and I'm putting it aside. Maybe I'll come back to it one day. Maybe I never will. But like, that's kind of the great thing about books is you can close them and stop reading them. And then you don't have to be in that scary situation anymore. So
I pushed back on when Ali Malenica was here. She said something similar, was that you put the book down and it's over. And I disagree a little bit. That's the nice thing, the nice creeping, insidious thing about horror fiction.
oh yeah.
If it gets scary enough before you put it down, it's there. You're going to carry that.
Oh, for sure.
I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that will make you a more interesting person, a more nuanced person who sees things. It's good to be shaken up once in a while. I 100% believe that.
I think
no,
I
there is no safety. Even if everybody lives, okay, you get to the ending where they're all having hot chocolate. But if I read enough of this and you get dark enough before that, I know that it could have gone another way. And just the fact that I had that thought, it still happened, even if it didn't happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's how books work. That's how stories and literature, fiction, nonfiction works. It's like gets into your head sometimes and makes you think. And for better or worse, sometimes it changes you. No, and you're right. Like even if you put a book down, the thing that scared you in the first place isn't just going to evaporate from your head. However, this is one of the things that when I talk to schools and libraries and students, I mentioned this elsewhere as well. I will show the kids this GIF that I found of these. Basically, the image is a very dark hallway with a light at the end, and there's a doll standing in the middle of the hallway. Super creepy looking. These two kids, they can't be more than like 10 years old. They come around the corner, both freeze when they see the doll. One of the kids like books it back in the other direction, disappears. But his friend races forward, kicks the doll in the face, and the doll goes flying. And I think it's a perfect representation of like the two, like these two kinds of readers. It's like you face your fears or you run away. And both are absolutely valid. I'm not saying like you encounter something scary, you go and like punch it in the face. Sometimes the best course of action is to run away. But I do usually tell the audiences of when I'm showing them this, I'm like, I want to believe, I like in like a half-hearted, like sort of like silly kind of way, like tell them like, pretty sure that the kid who went forward and kicked that doll in the face has read some of my books. Because ultimately, like, that's what scary stories can do. I feel like they can make you, like, they sort of teach you how to be brave. Like, if you can you scan through this terrifying chapter of, like Ali Melanenko's book, This Appearing House, where horrifying monsters exist. You get through those chapters, you get through the journey that you go through with the main character, Jack, who is not only seeing monsters on the outside, but fighting monsters in her own head and fighting monsters in her own body. You come away from that book and a lot of these scary stories understanding how the world works, and that it's not all rainbows and unicorns and pretty flowers and best friends and sleepovers, and like not disparaging any of those kinds of stories, because those are appealing and fun as well. But you read horror, and it changes you. and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing.
I mean, it would be if you were going to live in a perfectly safe world where nothing bad ever happened and you were never going to have to deal with adversity. It was just going to be sleepovers and hot chocolate forever. Well, why have you taken time and read this nasty story? But if you're going to live in a world like the one most of us are, where we are going to encounter some of this stuff, I think it's a mistake to go through even your early childhood and never test those waters a little bit. You don't have to go, you don't have to start in the deep end of the pool. You don't have to wake up and read Nietzsche one day at age 6. You can wade your way in one toe at a time slowly. Start with Bunnicula, start with some early R.L. Stein, then get your hands on some damn Poblocki, some
yes, there's levels of fear, layers of fear. Talking about kids now and what they're experiencing and have experienced over the course of the past 25 years, where it start, like, I know this was a problem before Columbine, but like, active shooter drills, at like, like the amount of scary things that are coming at us at all times from the media, and like we were talking earlier on, like honestly, that thought just flew out of my head. So you can cut that part out.
Right. The idea that the child has to go to school, and when I teach, I've done active shooter drills. It's terrifying. You have to, because what you come to realize just in the drill that we had somebody who walked around with a gun that shot ping pong balls. I couldn't dodge the ping pong balls. I'm not dodging bullets.
Oh my gosh, that's a thing that you had to do?
Yeah, I was training to be a substitute teacher. Was just so you know, they would go and and you had to experience where you need to be in a room to be out of the line of fire, how to barricade the door. I mean, stuff that knock on wood, won't come in handy, but I live here in the United States, where apparently we're going to continue to sacrifice I don't know how many children every year because we love guns just that much. So long as I live in that country and we're going to continue with this madness, it is a practical thing to know. And these children, the idea that they're going to live in that world, they're going to know that the adults in their life are okay with some of them dying so that we can continue to live the way that we've lived. They're going to know that, but this story is too scary. This fiction jail, that traumatized me.
Well, it's funny. I went up to Saratoga Springs here in New York State a couple weekends ago to go on a ghost tour of like a historic ghost tour of the city, and ended up at this bookstore called Northshire Books, Saratoga. And it has one of the most incredible children's sections I've ever seen, upstairs on the second floor. I had done an event with them a very, very long time ago, maybe 10 years ago. And I hadn't been back up there. It's about an hour and a half from my house. So it's not necessarily a place where I'm like heading every weekend. But I walked in there, and when I started, just to flash back a little bit, when I started working on The Stone Child, my first book, there were a few middle grade scary titles floating about. Brad Strickland was still making books based on the John Bellers characters, and of course long stays like Mary Downing Hahn were continuing to write a book a year, and she still is. She's amazing. And many more. Jonathan Auxier was doing The Night Gardener, and Adam Gidwitz with Tale Dark and Graham. Like all of these sort of like had elements of scary stuff going on, but they weren't like pervasive like at that time in terms of trade books. Like they existed, but it wasn't like a focus. And when I walked into the children's section at Northshire, like almost every title I was seeing faced out, or like, maybe it's the time of year, but like there were so many middle grade horror novels. I was like, what happened? Like, horror exploded. And the more that I'm talking to teachers and educators, librarians, they're like, we cannot keep scary stories for kids on the shelves. They're checked out immediately, and they're asking for more. Like on Twitter, like people asking like, what's more titles we can get into our library? Like the kids are blowing through them. And I think it speaks to what's happening in this country right now and this world. It's like, and like what I said, like how that kid rushing forward and kicking the doll in the face, like kids are trying to learn how to cope with their own anxieties and fears. And I think these books are helping. And I think people, like, unfortunately, we've gotten to a point where it's necessary for us to be able to share these kinds of stories with young people so that they can process trauma. They can process the scary thoughts that go through their head at night or at school during a test, or, you know, having even on a simple level of like just being a kid and having an argument with your friend, like, you know, that can be a scary thing. And a lot of these books are metaphors for those kinds of real life events that kids are dealing with. I think it's amazing that publishers and bookstores are sort of opening their eyes to seeing like how very powerful and popular these books can be. You know, like post Goosebumps, which I sort of like missed in the 90s. I was a little too old for that. Like there was that surge in horror in the 90s, and there was that surge in horror in like the 70s and the 80s. It goes in these waves, and I feel like we're definitely at the top of a wave right now with this particular genre.
No, that makes sense. You can't kick all of the gun lobby. You can't kick systemic corruption on our political level that allows these guns continue to be ever present. But a creepy doll in a hall, you can kick that. Mm-hmm. you can have that moment of catharsis, or if you can mm-hmm. put it all into one monster, you can maybe beat the monster.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know. I appreciate that that's where we're at, because this is something that I've felt has been important for a long time. Like stuff I've gotten pushback from strangers at parties, like when I'm telling them what I do for a living. I've learned not to say I write horror for children anymore.
Why?
Because people don't want to hear that. I will tell them I write literature for young people, and I'm like, oftentimes it's spooky, scary mysteries, sometimes involving ghosts. Like it's vaguer than like the punch of the word horror, which I think some people don't want to hear. Some people don't care, but like I've gotten responses from people that are like, literally somebody said to me, like a stranger said to me, like, oh, that hurts my heart. And I was like, I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that somebody said, what I do when I'm passionate about doing, the stories that I'm passionate about telling, hurts their heart. But you know, to each his own. And you know, I would never say that to somebody, but
you should have said, how'd you get here today? You must have been in bed just from the moment you turned on the television and saw the state of the world. Like, oh, my heart. No, but I'm
yeah, your heart must hurt a lot. You know, I don't know. I love kids. I love how strong they are. I love how open they are to noticing the world, and they're noticing everything. And like you said, you have a child, and you know, I'm sure you're seeing like every day is a new experience where like you might learn something that cracks your head open, like, and blows your mind, like something about dinosaurs or something about black holes or something. Like you're constantly, the world is reframing itself every single day. And I think we don't give kids enough credit for the massive amounts of change that they are going through moment by moment, and processing. And I think, I think if we did understand that, like, nobody would ever say to somebody else that hurts your heart.
Very passive aggressive thing to say.
I just walked away. I was like, well, in fact, no, I think I actually said to this person, I said, well, I get a lot of letters from parents and readers, and these are the most special things to me, where somebody will say, like, my kid has been, scared to pick up a book because they have a learning disability, or some kind of neurodivergence or whatever, sort of been discouraged from picking up big challenging books. And like, they're like, they found your book, they now wanted to read it 3 or 4 times, with me, without me, like, they have all these questions for you about like where it's set and all this stuff. And like, now they want to read more books. Now they've discovered that they like reading. I'm like, how could you possibly say that what I've done is harmful? Like, this, I created a reader, like, and not just one. So that was my response. That was my response to somebody sort of being negative towards the genre that I have tended to focus on. And I think that was fair. Is the best that I could do at that moment.
Yeah, the answer they're not going to give you is now you've provoked them to have independent thoughts. I wanted them to think what I wanted them to think.
Oh, and that's the scariest thing for adults. Like, that's scarier than monsters, is to have my child think for themselves. And that's why, so the trouble with what's happening in the country in terms of people trying to restrict access to books in libraries and schools and school districts, and even in bookstores anymore, like people suing authors and publishers to not even carry books in bookstores. Like, can we stop, please? It's
Yeah, that's the adult version of what we were talking about when you're looking for a metaphorical monster that you can tackle.
Oh, for sure.
That if I don't want to deal with the fact that our system is inexorably broken. How much money goes in from the gun lobby to elect these politicians that get up and tell you global warming isn't real? Oh my God, how could I possibly hope to deal with that? But violent video games, I can find out who made a violent video game and we can hurt their bottom line.
Yeah.
I can't get to all of my existential dread about the fact that I might have told my child some things that weren't correct, but I did the best that I could. And now they have questions that are big on their own. How am I supposed to confront that? But I can confront Dan Poblocki. I can tell him it hurts my heart.
Please don't.
Not saying it's right. I just understand how that spirals and becomes a problem.
No, I got you. Yeah, I hear you.
No, nobody here is endorsing. Do not contact Dan Poblocki. Hurting your heart.
Don't contact me if I've hurt your heart.
Are challenging children to treat and to think independently. This is ultimately for their benefit, which means it's for all their benefit.
Yeah. Yep.
We skipped over some of the origin story, and I probably just as well because we're coming up on the end of our time together. But I did love this idea that you get in this class. You're right away. You're working with brilliant folks, and then I know that you get involved in an actual critique group, and that one member of that group worked with some editors at Random House. Or how does that story go? You know it better than I do.
Yeah, so like I stated, taking that class at School of Visual Arts, becoming friends with Brian Floca and David Levithan. David Levithan is an editor at Scholastic, became a huge, big best-selling author in his own right with Every Day, and that whole series, as well as many other books for young readers. David was kind enough to bring me into an early version of a book group that he was starting in like 2000, 2001, where we were reading sort of like what he considered the, you know, the essential young adult canon. I think he was starting to teach a class at the new school in children's literature, and even with his new imprint at that time called Push, he was trying to sort of school himself and educate himself in all the things that had come before. So through that group, I started meeting other writers, agents, editors, friends of David, connected with some of them, formed a very, very small writing group. These friends of mine, Billy, Nico, and Nick, they knew that I was working on a manuscript. They knew about my 700-page, like, ridiculous, young adult novel.
Well, we said
and that I
people, so publish it.
No. And they and I was working on something else. I was getting pretty close to having a draft of that ready, and we were sharing work. I can't remember if it was like once a week or once a month we get together, and it was somebody else's turn to like share whatever we'd produced, and it was a way to push ourselves to get work done. And ultimately then I didn't even know Nick Eliopoulos was an editorial assistant at the time at Random House Books for Young Readers. I was so like green, I didn't even know what that meant. Like, first of all, they invited me into the writing group, or we decided to do this all together. I didn't know Nick very well. I didn't even consider that like he was working in children's publishing. I finished that manuscript that I was working on post the 700-page debacle, and shared it with the group, and they all were like, "We love this. This is really good." And I was like, "Really? What?" And Nick was like, "Can I take this into my my job, my crew, and show it to the people, see what they think?" And I was like, "Are you kidding?" I was like, is that possible? Like, is that really a thing that could happen? And he did it. He brought this first draft of a book that is not published into this into the the acquisitions meeting, and had them check it out. And like half of the editors like really liked it, and half of them were like, this isn't ready. And so ultimately what they asked him to do was work with me on the manuscript over the course of the next year, and then resubmit. And so I did that. And in the meantime, things moving really slowly. I'm still I'm working at Sloan Kettering at that point. And I was inspired to dig out all of the John Bellairs books from my mom's basement. And I was like, I'm not seeing any. I was like, I want to read books like this. I haven't seen anything like this sort of sparking my imagination lately. I was like, I'm gonna try and write one of these. So I wrote 80 pages of something I was calling The Stone Child, and I shared it with my writing group. And they all flipped out, and they were like, we love this. And Nick was like, I have to take this in to the editors and show them this. It might push them forward into saying yes to the manuscripts that they're considering right now. And I was like, this is 80 pages. I don't think I've even combed through it to correct spelling mistakes. He was like, it doesn't matter. So what ended up happening was like a month or so later, like they ended up, he called me on the phone. He was like, they don't want the manuscript that you that you've been working on, but they were like, they love this Stone Child thing so much. They want to give you a 2-book contract for this and, something else. And I was like, it was like jaw dropping. I couldn't believe my luck. I couldn't believe that was how I got my foot in the door. And trust me, like, it was rough. I feel like my foot was slammed in that door many times. But eventually, like, as an unpublished and sort of untrained writer at that time, I had no idea what I was doing. I had 80 rough pages in that I had accepted as the first book in a contract with one of the major publishers on the planet. And then I had to finish writing it. It was the most, it broke my brain. It was the most stressful thing that I think I'd ever been through, which only was stressful because I wanted it so badly. Like I was determined to kick the door open. People, like, traditionally, if you're trying to publish traditionally, you're querying and querying and getting rejections and querying, and like that has happened to me since that first sort of like miraculous yes that I got from Random House. But it was not how I got myself into the business. And like, I look back, I'm like, that was insane. I can't believe that happened. And I don't think that I think it was a very specific time in publishing that people were willing to give people like me a chance to prove themselves. I don't know if we're in, like, I don't know the publishing industry, like what's happening behind closed doors, what people are saying, but like, I don't think we're in a place like that anymore, where people are just like, yeah, let's throw, this much money at them and see what happens. I just don't think that's happening anymore.
Well, you withdrew your bloodied stump of a foot from the door eventually. And by God, you limped on for a bit, but now I'm talking to you 20 books in, still going strong.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. Keep this up. My foot hurts. Keep kicking that door down.
Well, esteemed audience knows that I have to ask, because I ask everybody that comes on the show, and they're leaning forward extra, because when I talk to a horror author, and being a horror author, I know part of everyone's unspoken questions: what happened to you? why do you write these things? Dan Poblocki, have you ever seen a ghost and or a flying saucer?
Oh boy, I think yes to both.
Excellent.
Flying saucer, I'll do the flying saucer one. Grew up spent a lot of time in my teen years in New Jersey. I was born in Rhode Island, moved to New Jersey when I was 11 years old, which is right around that time that I'm that age group that I continued to go back to writing. So like, I'm pretty sure something is, stuck in my brain about that transition from one state to another. Hanging out with close friend Caroline one night in Basking Ridge, New Jersey, up in the hills outside of the center of town and stuff. Very clear vision of the night sky. And like, I just remember looking up. I think my sister was there, and my friend Caroline, and looking up at the stars. And like, one of them started making this weird, like, it looked like a star, and like started making this weird sort of like unusual movement. Like, it didn't look like an airplane, it didn't look like a satellite, and like all of a sudden it just like kind of did a check mark and then like shot off. And I'm like that was a UFO. So yes, I've seen a UFO. I mean, that's like ultimately the definition of UFO, right? I don't know what it was. It could have been anything. Could have been a firefly. I don't know. And then ghosts, I mean, this is my big thing. Like, when my family moved from Rhode Island to New Jersey, we moved into a house that had many like so many unexplainable things happen in it. Like I ultimately just I tell stories at some of my school events, library events about growing up in a haunted house, because so many things happen. Like it's almost unbelievable. I don't like to I don't like to come across as like one of those people who's like, oh, like the supernatural, ghost hunter kind of like people with the apparatus and hunting things down. Like it's more of an anecdotal stuff for me. But because ultimately, like when you're talking about ghosts, you're talking about the afterlife possibly. And I don't know where I stand on all that stuff, but I know what I've seen, I know what I've heard, um, and some of it's been pretty scary. And a lot of that has ended up in the books that I've written. I mean, I think that the last book I had come out in Scholastic last December, called Liar's Room, as most explicitly, like I've taken experiences from my own sort of haunted childhood and put them in that book, which I haven't really had a chance to talk about very much. But yeah.
Well, we've spent a lot of time, sounded really smart, talking about fiction, talking about horror, talking about society and some of its ills. I feel like we've established enough credibility to build that up. Now we cash it in. What are some of the specific things that you're comfortable sharing that happened to you in the haunted house?
Oh, like just to be like vague, it was a lot of it was like lights turning on and off by themselves, doors opening and closing, things sort of left differently around the house, from when we went to bed compared to when we woke up, being alone in the house and hearing footsteps upstairs. One specific time we had a like a swinging door between the kitchen and the dining room, and I remember trying to push it open one afternoon after school, and somebody pushing back from the other side. Like literally seeing people standing at the end of my bed in the middle of the night, hearing growling noises and like really unexplainable, weird, otherworldly sounds coming from dark parts of the house, and more and more and more. But yeah, those are some of the big ones. I mean, ultimately, it was just like what ends up happening when you're living in a place like that. It's just, it becomes just everyday normal. So like the light turns on behind you, you're like, oh well, and you go and turn it off. I think in a way it's sort of like taught me how to be brave in the way that the middle grade horror, I feel like, can teach young people to be brave, because ultimately I don't think that there was anything dangerous happening in that house. It was all shock and awe. Yeah, I don't want to come across sounding like a
esteemed audience, a Halloween episode, and by God, we have delivered.
There you go. That's yes, these are my Halloween stories. Maybe they're true, maybe they're not. So there you go.
But I find it an amusing thing, that so often people will have a supernatural experience and then take that to be, the key for everything in life. which I think is usually there's bad philosophy. Like people know I love to beat up on Ayn Rand because I think Ayn Rand was nuts. And by the end, you're listening to a crazy meth head when you're listening to Ayn Rand. That's what's happening there. But anyway, she would take a couple of principles like, oh, this is true, and apply them to everything. Like, oh, this is true for business, therefore it must be true for relationships. It must be true for personal hygiene. It must be true for everything. No, it's true for the one thing you found it. And so when people look at a supernatural experience and say, aha, and now I understand the complete afterlife and the meaning of existence. Right. No, right. Understand this one thing. So obviously I wouldn't expect you to have all of those answers based on this experience, but having had that experience, how does that change how you approach horror and how you approach life, knowing, not thinking, but knowing that that's absolutely a possibility wherever you go, that you might bump into another one of these supernatural events?
I honestly often don't really think about it. I found it scary, but also very exciting when I'd have moments like this. It often would turn into me running to a family member and being like, I just saw this crazy thing. Ah! Or a family member being like, I like coming home and finding them waiting outside of the house. My sister like couldn't stay in the house because of the noises she was hearing. It's like, ultimately, wait, what was your question?
How does having that knowledge, not the thought, but the absolute knowledge that there is something beyond what we can see and what we commonly accept as our reality, knowing that, how does that impact your approach to writing horror, and how does that also impact your approach to life?
Right. I mean, for me, ultimately, like, it's given me a lot of inspiration about, you know, when I want to create a character or character's experience in a particular scene where they're feeling fear, like because of this unknown thing that is happening to them, depending on whatever story it is. Like, I feel like I've had that experience, and I know what it feels like in the body, and I know what it, you know, what it can feel like in the mind, and how it can sort of change you. I think that's ultimately where it's taken form in my writing, and in life. I mean, like, because I've found so much inspiration in those experiences, like I'm intrigued by it. Like, you know, I think having a little ghost in your house is kind of fun. You know, I don't want anything too wild, like, you know, but like just like a little hint that like something creepy, you know, something creepy is going on. Like in this house in particular, when I first moved in, my housemate Matthew, who lives in a room downstairs right near the front door. I don't know if you can hear him downstairs. He's talking really loudly right now on the phone. He decorated the house for Halloween. I think the first Halloween that we were here, and like he said, he haunted the house. So we have a front porch, and he put up a whole bunch of stuff, and like these two little ghouly things that were on strings, and they both happened to turn and face the front door. And the day after he did that, I went to open the screen door to go out to the porch, and realize the screen door was locked. And I didn't even, I'd been in the house, so it was such a new house to me at the time, I didn't realize the screen door could lock. And so I said to Matthew, I was like, did you lock this? He was like, no. It's like, I didn't even know that could lock. So it's like, did somebody come up on our porch and lock the door and then close it again? So like, I tried to do that from the outside, but the way the switch works is you can't lock yourself out of the house with the screen door. So whoever locked the door, had to do it from inside. Matthew didn't do it. I didn't do it. We're the only two adult humans in the house. And I like to think like if there is like a little spirit in our house right now, like they got freaked out by the Halloween decorations and we're like, let's put in a little extra lock on the door so those two ghoulies can't get in here. It's like, so like, I mean, I feel like every house that I've lived in has had some kind of weird little thing happen, but I'm the kind of person who pays attention to these things too. So I don't want to say like I'm constantly moving from one haunted house to another haunted house, but like if something like that happens, I'll try and figure it out. If I can't figure it out, automatically my brain goes to, well, it was a ghost. Must be a ghost.
Well, conversely, there's lots of people walking around that are having haunted experiences every day that have found different ways to rationalize them away.
Yeah. Yep. Or they just, yeah. You just don't, yeah. I think that's generally the case. People are like, I've never seen a ghost. I'm like, I bet you have.
The pipes are screaming, get out again. Gotta call. It's not a problem.
Yeah. Yep.
Dan, this has been an absolute privilege and a pleasure. I know I could talk your face off forever if you let me, and I'm going to stop myself before I do. You're going to write another 20 books. Come back and we'll do this again sometime.
Thank you. I appreciate you letting me ramble. No, it was really fun. It was really fun chatting with you. Thank you.
My last question for you for today, and I'd like to end on this, is if you could go back to the start of your career, middle of your career, wherever it would have made a difference, and give yourself some advice that would have made easier your path, it might make easier the paths of everybody who's watching or listening to us now, what would you go back and say to yourself?
You know, I would say I got some really good advice when I was starting out and writing in my spare time at the hospital with really no aspirations of publishing. I just was doing this just to see what would happen. And there's an author named Rachel Cohn who is a friend. She co-wrote some books with David Levithan, who we mentioned earlier. I think maybe most notably was Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist. And she's written books on her own as well. I think Gingerbread was one of them. She was wonderful, a wonderful young adult author. And she told me, like, for better or worse, like, she was like, this business will try, like, it's just hard. She was like, you got to focus. And she was like, put up your blinders. like the horses in New York City on like pulling carriages. She's like, people are going to be coming at you from all sides telling you you're not good enough, or this couldn't work because that's not the way the industry's been traditionally doing things, or whatever. She was like, put up your blinders, focus on the work. That's what's most important. I would say that advice I would share to other people as well, because it really helped me. And the blinders for me helped me get through working a day job at a hospital, which was very difficult, very emotional. But when I was having one of those days, I'd think back to what Rachel had said: put up your blinders. This is part of it as well. Like, don't focus on this person's political agenda right now. Don't focus on this crying patient. Of course, I was going to focus on the crying patient. But like, in terms of what I needed to do for my career, it was just staying focused. And I still try and tell myself that sometimes, because it's hard. It's hard to keep going, with the way that publishing changes, has changed, will continue to change. I'm sure that this would be really good advice for people dealing with their own books that are being challenged around this country. I mean, yeah, you want to fight back too. Maybe that's part of your focus, but also like don't let it derail you. Don't let these things derail you. Focus on what you want to make and make it.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. Where can esteemed audience follow you online on social media and all that good stuff?
Sure. I'm on Instagram at Dan Poblocks with an X. Just share stuff from my life and book updates and stuff, silly stuff. I'm on Twitter at Dan Poblocki, and I think there's a Facebook page as well. I also have my website, danpoblocki.com, where you can reach out to me, ask me about school visits or questions about my books, or just want to say hi. There's a contact page there, and I try my best to stay on top of it. But yeah, let's leave it at that. I try my best.
Tales to Keep You Up at Night is available now, esteemed audience. 'Tis the season if you're listening to us as this comes out. If it's after it comes out, well, good news. It's still a good time for a scary story. You know, this morning, shove all those nice warm thoughts away, turn off the tree. It's a great time for a scary story. It's always a good time for a scary story. Tales to Keep You Up at Night is going to give you a scary story. And once you're finished with that, check out All Together Now, a zombie story by Robert Kent. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. For more information, head to middlegradeninja.com. And as always, God willing, I'm alive. I'll see you next week.